Hello friends, this video on natural resources part 18 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. So let us first talk about nitrogen fixation. So by now we know that plants and animals need nitrogen to make proteins, DNA and biomolecules. And we also know that nitrogen is a stable compound. So if you look at the structure of nitrogen, there is a triple bond between two atoms of nitrogen. So triple bond has very high strength. So therefore nitrogen is very stable compound. So if you really want to break this nitrogen or break this triple bond, a large amount of energy would be needed to break the triple bond. So it is not a very easy task to break the nitrogen molecules. So what is this nitrogen fixation? It is the process of conversion of this nitrogen into usable ammonia. Why ammonia is usable? Because ammonia can be utilized in that form by the plants. So our task is to convert nitrogen to usable ammonia, and this conversion is known as nitrogen fixation. Now the question is, who does this task? How do we do this conversion? Now there are multiple ways of doing nitrogen fixation. For example, there is one process called atmospheric nitrogen fixation. There is another process called industrial fixation, and the third process is called biological fixation. So nitrogen fixation can happen in any one of these three ways. So let us quickly look at each of these ways. So let's first talk about atmospheric nitrogen fixation. So what happens here? Here atmosphere plays a major role. So as I mentioned just now that nitrogen has triple bonds. So these triple bonds are often called as the high energy bonds because you need high energy to break these bonds. So in atmospheric nitrogen fixation, this is a natural process which happens on its own. What happens is lightning and ultraviolet radiation provide the energy to convert the nitrogen to oxides. So we all know that ultraviolet radiation and lightning, these have extremely huge amount of energy with them. So that energy will become sufficient to break this triple bond of nitrogen and convert it into various forms of oxides like NO2 or NO or N2O. So that ways it can convert it into its oxides. But the disadvantage of this process is that only a very small amount of nitrogen is fixed in this way because this is a natural process. So whenever there would be a lightning or an ultraviolet radiation exposure, only then this conversion will take place. So we cannot make it happen artificially. And also with this process only a very small amount of nitrogen will get fixed, but the demand of nitrogen for the plants is a lot more. So these are the limitations, but this is how the atmospheric nitrogen fixation works. Now let's look at the second process, which is industrial nitrogen fixation. So what is this industrial nitrogen fixation? This process is often termed as the Haber-Bosch process, which is named after the scientist who for the first time found out this method of nitrogen fixation. So in this process, under very high temperature and pressure, nitrogen is converted into ammonia. So something of this sort. So nitrogen was made to combine with hydrogen to form ammonia. So this is the chemical equation. So it was, and this reaction happened only under extremely high temperature and high pressure. So it is estimated that half of the protein in a human consists of nitrogen, originally fixed by the Haber process. So this process was initially quite a successful process, and with this process quite a good amount of nitrogen fixation was actually done. However, this process also has its own negative effects. For example, this process leads to a lot of atmospheric pollution because when you actually perform this reaction, a lot of unwanted or undesirable gases are emitted which might pollute the atmosphere. So this results in atmospheric pollution. Now so far we have been talking about how to control atmospheric pollution, right? So anything that adds to atmospheric pollution is not considered to be a very good process. So we somewhere need to balance it out. In fact, this process also leads to surface water and groundwater contamination. So that ways it also causes water pollution too. So now do you know why does that happen? Because as you remember, as I was telling, that oxides of nitrogen, oxides of sulfur, they have very high tendency to cause pollution. So here when you perform this industrial nitrogen fixation, you actually carry out this entire reactions in industries, where besides this process there are a lot of side products, there are a lot of harmful gases which get emitted, which in turn cause atmospheric pollution. Also, the remains of the reaction, they are all dumped into the water bodies, which in turn can also cause water pollution. So this was about industrial nitrogen fixation. Now let's come to the third process, that is biological nitrogen fixation. Now this is interesting because this has less negative effects, and this is the most common way of nitrogen fixation. So here the process of conversion of nitrogen into usable ammonia happens by living organisms. That is why the name is biological nitrogen fixation, because living organisms do this conversion of nitrogen into usable ammonia. Now you might be wondering that what are those living organisms which help in this kind of conversion? Because by now we know that for this process, for this conversion to take place, a lot of energy is needed. So which is that living organism which would provide that much of energy? So what we see is there is an enzyme called nitrogenase which is capable of reducing nitrogen to ammonia. So this enzyme nitrogenase plays a very critical role in this process of nitrogen fixation. So let us now see what are those nitrogen fixing living organisms. Now there are certain microorganisms which have the ability to fix atmospheric nitrogen. So these are the nitrogen fixing microbes. Now these type of nitrogen fixing microbes are also of two types. The first type are the free living nitrogen fixing microbes. Free living means those microbes which live independently. So they do not depend on any other organism for their survival. So they just live independently. So let us take some examples of free living nitrogen fixing microbes. For example, azotobacter. This is an aerobic bacteria. That means a bacteria which needs oxygen for its survival. So it is a bacteria which has the ability to fix nitrogen and it lives independently. So it is a free living nitrogen fixing bacteria. Similarly, rhodospirillum, this is an example of an anaerobic bacteria which doesn't need oxygen for its survival. But this is also a nitrogen fixing bacteria which is a free living. Anabina or nostoc, these are also aerobic cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria are nothing but blue-green algae. So these are all examples of some free living nitrogen fixing microbes. That is, they are capable of fixing nitrogen, but at the same time they live independently. The other category of nitrogen fixing microbes are the symbiotic nitrogen fixing microbe. Now what do we mean by symbiotic? So symbiotic relationship refers to a type of relationship where two organisms live together such that both of them get mutually benefited. So let's say there are two organisms which are living together. So the first organism is benefited from the second organism. The second organism is also benefited from the first organism. So basically that kind of relationship is called symbiosis. Now we do have many such symbiotic nitrogen fixing microbes. Now the best example of symbiosis that I can tell you is lichens. So lichen is a symbiotic association between fungi and algae. So where algae prepares the food and provides the fungi with food, whereas the fungi gives protection to the algae. So one is providing food, the other is providing protection. So that way both of them are mutually benefited. That is symbiosis. So let us look at some examples of symbiotic nitrogen fixing microbes. For example, Rhizobium, Frankia, these are examples of symbiotic nitrogen fixing microbes. So if you talk about Rhizobium, so these are rod-shaped bacteria. They are free living in the soil. So if they are present in the soil, then they can live independently. But they are in symbiotic relationship with roots of leguminous plants. So roots of leguminous plants. Now what are leguminous plants? So the plants of peas, beans, lentils, they are all legumes, like peas, beans, lentils, these are legumes. So if these bacteria, if rhizobium is present in the roots of such plants, then it is present in a symbiotic relationship where it derives its food from the roots of the leguminous plants, and at the same time it benefits the roots of the leguminous plants by providing nitrogen. So that means it takes benefit from the roots of the plants, and it also gives benefit to the roots of the plants. So rhizobium is an example of a symbiotic nitrogen fixing microbe. Now, a question that might come to your mind is, okay, so rhizobium is a bacteria which is free living in the soil, but it is symbiotic when it is present in the roots of leguminous plants. Now, the question is, will both of these rhizobium help in nitrogen fixation? No, not really. So, there are two scenarios. In one scenario, rhizobium is free living in the soil. Now, for the free living rhizobium which is present in the soil, the enzyme nitrogenase is not operational, and we have seen that this enzyme is actually going to convert nitrogen to ammonia. Right? So the main function will be of this enzyme. But in free living rhizobium, this enzyme is not operational. That means free living rhizobium will not help in nitrogen fixation. Whereas in case of symbiotic rhizobium, the enzyme nitrogenase is operational. Therefore, when we are talking about the biological nitrogen fixation, it is only the symbiotic rhizobium which will be helpful and not the free living rhizobium. Thank you. Please visit examfear.com for free quality education. You can learn with a simple 4-step learning process wherein you can watch video lessons, you can ask your questions, you can refer notes, and you can take a free online test. We have content for class 6 to 12 on physics, chemistry, mathematics, and biology along with practical videos. So please subscribe to our channel for daily updates. Thank you.